The laughter hit me first, sharp, cruel, and echoing off crystal chandeliers like shattered glass, shattering further. A tiny apartment? Really, Ruth? My father's voice boomed across the mahogany dining table, cutting through the delicate clink of wine glasses. 30 years old, and I was still the family's favorite punchline. Everyone laughed. My cousin Mark, his hand wrapped around a tumbler of scotch. Aunt Sheila, who hid her smirk behind a napkin. Even Uncle David, who'd always seemed kind, cracked a smile. But it was Denise who laughed loudest, my father's new wife, half his age, with teeth too white and a voice that dripped like honey laced with arsenic. I guess some people just don't aim high enough, Dad continued, gesturing dramatically with his glass. He stood at the head of the table like a monarch holding court, his Rolex catching the light like a beacon of his own importance. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, his pride and joy sat gleaming in the driveway, a brand-new Lexus, top of the line, a monument to his success. My stomach twisted as heat crawled up my neck. I'd come straight from work, still in my thrifted blazer, navy, vintage Armani if you knew where to look, and shoes worn at the heels from walking the 3 blocks to the metro. I'd brought a homemade pie because my budget didn't stretch to the expensive wine everyone else had gifted. When I set it on the marble counter, Dad had picked it up, sniffed it like it might be spoiled, and set it down with visible distaste. "That's cute, honey," he'd said, loud enough for the kitchen staff to hear. "Maybe next year you'll afford something store-bought." My mother, God rest her, would have squeezed my hand under the table. But she'd been gone for 2 years now, and her absence was a room I couldn't leave, a grief I wore like a second skin. My daughter, the minimalist, Dad declared now, eyes gleaming with the pleasure of cruelty. She lives in a matchbox and thinks it's a lifestyle choice. Voluntary poverty, how very trendy. Very aspirational. Denise leaned against his shoulder, playing the devoted wife. I watched her perfectly manicured hand rest on his arm, the diamond ring catching light like a weapon. 3 months ago, she'd whispered in my ear at a charity event, "You should really do something about your appearance, Ruth. You're not getting any younger, and with your limited circumstances." She'd smiled, and it wasn't kind. Well, a man wants to be proud of his family. I gripped my fork so hard my knuckles went white. Dad wasn't done. "You know what the problem is with you, Ruth? No ambition. Your brother Mark," he gestured to Mark, who looked genuinely uncomfortable. "He understands that success requires sacrifice, vision, drive. But you've always been content with scraps." Mark shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. "Dad, maybe we could." "Maybe nothing." My father cut him off, not unkindly. "Just speaking truth. Ruth needs to hear it. Someone has to be honest with her." The table fell silent. Everyone stared at their plates, waiting to see if I'd cry. That's what they expected. That's what I'd done for the past 2 years. Smiled through the humiliation. Excused myself to the bathroom. Returned with puffy eyes and a brave face that fooled no one. But something cracked open inside me that night. Not dramatically. Not with fire or fury. Quietly. Cleanly, like ice breaking beneath a weight it could no longer hold. I set down my fork carefully. I met my father's eyes, truly met them for the first time in years, and I didn't look away. I held his gaze long enough for the smile to falter on his face, long enough for him to realize that something fundamental had shifted in the space between us. "Thank you for dinner," I said softly, my voice steady in a way it hadn't been in years. It was enlightening. I left without dessert, without explanation, without apology, and as I walked toward the door, I heard my father sputter behind me, but I didn't turn around. That night, I sat in my apartment, my tiny, paid-for apartment that I'd decorated with butter-colored curtains and thrifted finds that actually meant something to me, and I didn't cry. I made tea instead, strong tea, in the chipped blue mug my mother had given me years ago. I sat by the window and watched the rain streak the glass like tears the city was crying for me. And I thought about my mother. She'd spent 30 years in that house, gradually disappearing. My father would mock her, and she'd apologize for things that weren't her fault. He'd belittle her accomplishments, and she'd insist they didn't matter anyway. She'd grown smaller and smaller with each passing year, until the disease had found her already half gone. "Don't let him define you," she'd whispered to me once, her voice barely audible, the week before she died. Pancreatic cancer had stolen her ability to speak clearly, but not her wisdom. Never her wisdom. "Promise me, Ruth. Don't let him make you small. Promise me you'll fight back." I'd promised her that night, holding her hand, feeling her bones bird-fragile beneath my fingers. Then I'd spent 2 years making myself exactly what she'd warned me against. But tonight, as the rain fell and the city hummed around me with the sound of 8 million lives being lived without my father's judgment, I felt something shift. Something essential. Not anger. Not yet. Clarity. Sharp. Pure. Undeniable. I opened my laptop and pulled up my finances. 30,000 in savings meticulously saved. A growing freelance business helping small artists establish their online presence and build the careers they deserved. Steady clients who actually valued my work. No debt. No dependence. I pulled up an image I'd saved years ago. A silver 1969 Mustang Mach 1. Classic. Beautiful. Powerful in a way that made your heart accelerate just looking at it. My father's dream car. The one he'd talked about constantly. The way other men talked about their children. The way he'd never talked about my mother or me. "Someday," he'd say, his eyes distant and reverent, "when I have enough, I'll get one." Real craftsmanship. Pure engineering. A man's car. That's what success looks like. I stared at that image for a long time. Then I opened a new document, and I started making a plan. But there was something else. Something darker. Something I hadn't told anyone, couldn't tell anyone. 3 months before the dinner, while visiting my father's office to retrieve a box of my mother's things, I'd found it a letter, addressed to a lawyer, discussing the Wellesby estate, land that had belonged to my mother's family for generations. Land that should have come to me. The letter contained words that made my hand shake. Transfer. Forged signature. Shell company. My hands had trembled as I photographed everything with shaky fingers. I'd carefully replaced the letter in its folder, my mind already racing. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind spun with implications, with betrayals, with a weight of knowledge I wasn't sure how to carry. I'd gone to the legal aid center where I volunteered, ostensibly to help people navigate court documents and fight back against the systems designed to keep them powerless. Really, I was investigating my own father, using the same resources I offered to others. What I found made my blood run cold and my determination crystallize. The Wellesby estate had been worth $4 million. $4 million. My mother had inherited it from her grandfather, a man I'd loved dearly. My father had somehow convinced her to sign papers transferring it to his name. He'd used legal language, corporate structures, professional advisors, all designed to confuse a woman who trusted him. Then, through a series of corporate shells and carefully hidden transactions that took me weeks to trace, he'd sold it. The money had disappeared into accounts I couldn't fully track, but the pattern was clear as day once you knew how to look. He'd stolen from her, while she was dying, from me, and she'd never even known. I could have gone to the police then, should have, maybe, reported him, let the system handle it. But I'd seen how the system worked from my volunteer position. Slow, uncertain, easily maneuvered by good lawyers and better lies. Instead, I made a different decision. I would build something so undeniable, so successful, so monumentally legitimate that when I exposed him, I wouldn't be standing there as his struggling daughter. Broken, pitiful, easy to dismiss. I'd be standing there as his equal, or better. The next year, I worked like I was on fire. Freelance projects became a legitimate business with a name, a website, and a vision. I hired other artists, talented people who were stuck in the same cycle I'd been in, believing they were worth less than they actually were. We did web design, branding, social media, content strategy, everything creative professionals needed but couldn't afford expensive agencies for. By month 6, I had 12 clients. By month 9, I had 40. By month 12, I had to hire another full-time person. At night, after the calls ended and the design work was done, I studied. I took courses in digital marketing, business law, financial management. I invested my profits carefully, not in luxury but in knowledge. I learned to speak the language of success fluently without an accent. My father called occasionally. I was polite but distant. When he asked about my life, I gave one-word answers that closed conversations rather than open them. How's work? Good. Still in that little apartment. Still there. You should move up to something nicer. You're an adult, Ruth. A professional. You should act like one. I like where I am, I'd say, and hang up. He didn't understand that I wasn't shrinking anymore. I was building myself from the ground up, one brick at a time, into something that couldn't be diminished by his voice. By month 18, my business had tripled. I moved to a small but beautiful townhouse on the edge of the city. 2 bedrooms, sunlight through tall windows that actually made me smile when I woke up, a tiny garden that smelled like lavender in spring and earth after rain. I hired a therapist, not because I was broken, I'd stopped believing that lie, but because I needed to understand the machinery of how I'd been fractured, and more importantly, how to rebuild myself so that I could never be so easily broken again. I dated someone kind for a few months, a man who made me laugh and didn't require me to be small. It didn't work out. We wanted different things from life, but it was the first relationship where I wasn't terrified of disappointing someone simply by existing. That was progress. By month 24, my business was generating 7 figures annually, not in revenue, in profit, real money, money I'd earned, money that was mine. I was no longer struggling. I was thriving, and no one in my family had any idea. It was Denise who called one Sunday afternoon, her voice bright with something that wasn't quite joy. "Your father wants to see you," she said, and her tone had that particular quality it always did, sweetness with teeth hidden behind the smile. "He's planning something special, a celebration dinner, family only, this Saturday." "What are we celebrating?" I asked, though I didn't particularly care what her answer would be. "His legacy," she said. "He's thinking about retiring. Wants to bring everyone together. Make sure his affairs are in order, you know? Make sure his children appreciate everything he's built." I understood exactly what she meant. He wanted to ensure his children were grateful, that we recognized his genius, that we never questioned anything he'd done, that we remained small enough to fit into the narrative he'd built. When? I asked. 3 weeks. Saturday evening. Formal dress. I hung up and sat very still in my townhouse, my coffee cooling beside me, my heart beginning to beat faster. In my desk, locked away in a folder with a combination lock, I had a file, thick with documents, photographs of signatures, bank statements from the Wellesby estate sale, email chains I'd obtained from archived files, audio recordings, conversations I'd secretly recorded while visiting his office, where I'd bugged a plant with a tiny voice-activated device I'd bought online for $40 and installed during a bathroom visit. In one of those recordings, he discussed the Wellesby estate with his accountant. His voice was proud, almost boastful, almost bragging about his own crime. She didn't read the documents. I told her it was just a routine transfer, simple formality. She signed it right there at the kitchen table without reading a word. Easiest $4 million I ever made. Best decision of my life. My mother had trusted him, had believed he loved her, had signed her inheritance away because her husband asked her to, and he'd stolen from her while she was dying of cancer. The rage I'd been holding at bay for 2 years crystallized into something sharp and pure and absolutely focused. I had enough to destroy him, legally, financially, reputationally. Everything I'd gathered would be admissible. The recordings had been made in a state where one party consent was legal. The documents were public records. The bank statements told their own story. But I wasn't quite ready. Not yet. I needed one more thing. The 1969 Mustang was parked outside the dealership near my new office, gleaming under the afternoon sun like a promise. I'd driven past it dozens of times over the past year. It was a restoration, someone's labor of love and passion, beautifully executed with attention to every detail. Silver with black racing stripes, just like the pictures my father had kept in his study when I was a child. The pictures he'd stared at like they were his future. The asking price was $250,000. I walked into the dealership, my heart steady, my mind clear. "I want to make an offer," I told the salesman. His eyes widened slightly. I knew what he saw, a woman in her early 30s, wearing a dress that cost more than my entire wardrobe used to, carrying a leather portfolio, walking with the confidence of someone who'd learned how to take up space. "The Mustang?" he asked, almost reverently. "Yes. It's a beautiful vehicle. Collector quality. Original restoration." "I know," I said. "My father's been in love with that model since I was a child. He never had the chance to own one." The salesman smiled, thinking he understood. Thinking this was a gift born of love, a daughter buying her father's dream. He had no idea it was a symbol, a statement, a weapon wielded with perfect precision. "I'd like to buy it today," I continued. "Can we make that happen?" His face lit up like I'd just made his entire month. We could, it turned out, make that happen very quickly. 3 weeks later, I pulled up to my father's estate in that Mustang. It was a Saturday evening. The sun was setting in long red ribbons across the sky, painting everything gold and crimson. The car purred beneath me like some beautiful, dangerous animal, like freedom with an engine. My father was standing on the front steps with Denise when I arrived, both of them waiting for the other guest to appear. I watched his expression cycle through confusion, then shock, then something darker as I stepped out of the vehicle and walked toward them with my head high. He walked toward me, his movements stiff, his face pale. "Ruth," he said carefully, as if speaking to something unpredictable. How did you?" "I bought it," I said simply, my voice carrying the weight of every year I'd spent building myself. "For myself." Denise's mouth fell open. "But this is—" My father reached toward the car, then stopped himself. His hand fell to his side. His jaw clenched. "This is a $250,000 automobile." "I know," I said. I met his eyes directly and I didn't look away. "I can afford it." Something flickered across his face. Anger, yes, but also something worse. The realization that I was no longer the daughter he could diminish. The daughter whose worth was determined by his approval. The daughter he could mock into smallness. I was no longer that person. "Well," he said finally, and his voice had gone stiff and strange. "I suppose I underestimated your capacity." "You did," I agreed. "Shall we go inside?" The dining room was all crystal and candlelight, just like the first time. But I was different now. Everything was different now. I wasn't the woman in the thrifted blazer anymore. I wasn't the daughter waiting for permission to matter. I wasn't the ghost haunting my own life. My father took his seat at the head of the table. Mark was there, looking uncertain. Aunt Sheila adjusted her napkin. Uncle David examined his wine glass. Denise arranged herself beside my father, her hand on his arm in that proprietary way. But I noticed her eyes darting to me with new wariness. Dad raised his glass, and the crystal caught the candlelight. "I wanted to bring everyone here tonight because I've made an important decision," he began, his voice back to its usual booming confidence, though something underneath had cracked. "I'm going to retire in 6 months, and I wanted to discuss the disposition of my assets. Mark, I'm planning to leave you the main business. Ruth, I've set aside a small trust, nothing extravagant, but enough to make your life a bit more comfortable. Small trust. Comfortable life. As if I still needed scraps from him. As if I was still that desperate. I set down my wine glass. I stood up. Every eye in the room turned to me. Actually, Father, I'd like to say something, I said. Ruth, he started in that warning tone he'd used since I was a child, the tone that meant sit down, be quiet, let the adults talk. Please, I interrupted, my voice calm and steady. This won't take long. I pulled out my phone. I'd spent the afternoon setting this up, transferring files, preparing the presentation. I'd sent copies to an attorney and to a journalist I'd been in contact with for weeks. I want to talk about the Wellesby estate, I continued. My father's face went absolutely white. I watched the color drain like someone had pulled a plug somewhere in his center. What did you say? He asked quietly, and there was something dangerous in that quiet. The Wellesby estate, I repeated clearly, for $1 million. Land that belonged to my mother's family. Land she inherited from her grandfather. Land that should have come to me. I played a recording. My father's voice filled the room, preserved in digital format, unavoidable. She didn't read the documents. I told her it was just a routine transfer. She signed it right there at the kitchen table without reading a word. Easiest $4 million I ever made. The sound of forks hitting plates. Gasps. My Aunt Sheila's hand flew to her mouth. Mark's face went pale, then flushed with something that looked like shame, though whether for his father or for himself I couldn't tell. That's not. My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping backward. You can't. I can, I said quietly. And I have. Documents. Bank statements. Email records. The corporate shells you set up to hide the proceeds. The conversations with your accountant about committing fraud. I have all of it. My attorney is already preparing the case. The money will go to my mother's actual heirs, that's me, and it's Mark if he chooses to accept his share and acknowledge what happened. Mark looked like he might be sick. He might have been crying. I couldn't quite tell in the candlelight. You ungrateful, my father started, his face purpling with rage, his voice rising to a shout. After everything I've done for you. I know what you're going to say, I continued, and my voice never wavered. It didn't rise to match his fury. It stayed level, reasonable, devastatingly clear. That you built everything. That you sacrificed. That I owe you my gratitude, my loyalty, my entire self. But you know what you actually taught me, Father? That a man who's willing to steal from a dying woman will steal from anyone. That success built on lies is just theft in a suit and tie. That sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to stop believing that love and cruelty are the same thing. I turned to face him fully, and I let him see me. Really see me, the woman I'd become. You mocked my apartment because you needed me to be small, I continued. You belittled my work because you needed me to need you. You stole from my mother because you believed that people existed for you to use and discard. That love was something you could weaponize. I paused. Let that land. I'm not that person anymore, Father. I haven't been for a very long time. And neither is Mark, I think. Neither of us are going to spend our lives making ourselves smaller so you could feel bigger. Ruth, he reached for me across the table and I stepped back. My attorney is going to contact you on Monday, I said. I suggest you speak to your own lawyer. You're going to need a very good one. I picked up my purse. Enjoy your retirement, I said, and I walked out. The Mustang purred to life beneath my hands, responding to the turn of the key like it had been waiting for me. I drove through the night, away from that house, away from the weight of other people's expectations and cruelties. The city lights blurred past my windows. The radio played soft jazz that felt like healing. By Monday morning, the story was breaking. A family friend who'd been at the dinner, someone I'd carefully cultivated as a connection over the previous weeks, had called a journalist. So had the attorney I'd invited, who'd witnessed the entire thing and provided documentation. By Wednesday, my father's business was under investigation. The SEC was involved. The state attorney general's office was looking into his practices. By Friday, his assets were frozen pending the outcome of litigation. Denise filed for divorce within a week. She'd married him for money. That much was crystal clear. With his assets frozen and his reputation imploding, there was nothing keeping her there. She was gone without a forwarding address. My mother's estate was settled in my favor. Mark accepted his share quietly. He called me a week later, his voice small and uncertain. "I didn't know," he said simply. "I didn't know what he did." "I know," I replied, and I meant it. Mark had always been his favorite, but that hadn't required him to become a villain. What he did to her, what he did to you. He trailed off, and I could hear him breathing, trying to find words. "Ruth, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I laughed at you that night. I should have." "I don't want to talk about him anymore," I said, and my voice was kind but firm. "I'm done with that story. Are you?" After a pause, he said, "Yeah, I think I am." "Good. Then let's build something new instead." 3 months later, I stood in front of a mirror in my townhouse. The woman, looking back at me, had steady eyes, strong shoulders, clothes that fit because they were chosen for me, by me, for no one else's approval. My hair was longer now, grown out the way I actually wanted it. My makeup, when I wore it, was for me. I thought about the girl I'd been, shrinking under the weight of cruelty masquerading as love. The woman I'd become while she wasn't looking. The transformation that had happened not in a moment, but across 1,000 small decisions to matter. The Mustang was parked in my driveway, polished to a shine, reflecting the afternoon light. Every time I drove it, I thought about my father, not with hate, but with a strange kind of gratitude. Because he'd taught me something essential, even if he'd meant it as a cruelty, that the only way to take back power from someone who took it from you is to stop giving them your attention, your energy, your belief in their right to judge you. My business was thriving beyond my wildest expectations. I'd hired 10 employees. We'd moved to a real office with windows and space. We were even getting media attention. The story of a young woman who built something from nothing, who reclaimed her future, who stood up to corruption and won. They didn't know the full story. They didn't know about my father or my mother or the years of diminishment. They just knew the ending. Success, justice, freedom. But I knew, and that was what mattered. I picked up my phone and called Mark. "Hey," said, "do you want to get dinner?" Real dinner, just us. No family performance. No pretense. Just 2 people who are trying to figure out how to be something other than what we were taught. He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said finally. "Yeah, I'd like that. I'd really like that." I smiled at my reflection. Good. My treat. I know this amazing restaurant. It's owned by a woman who overcame her own impossible situation. I think you'd appreciate the story. The Mustang needed a name, so I called it Freedom. That's what it represented. The moment I stopped being the daughter my father needed me to be and started being the woman I actually was. The moment I chose myself. My father went to trial. The evidence was overwhelming. He was convicted of fraud, embezzlement, and financial abuse. He served 18 months in a minimum security facility upstate. His business was dissolved. His reputation was destroyed. He'll spend the rest of his life trying to rebuild from nothing, the way he always said other people should have to do. I did not attend the trial. I did not watch him fall. That would have chained me to his story, made me complicit in defining myself by his destruction instead of my creation. Instead, I lived my own story. The money from the Wellesby estate was used to establish a fund for women leaving abusive relationships, women who needed resources, legal aid, support, and the knowledge that they could build something new. My mother would have appreciated that, I think. She would have appreciated that something good came from the cruelty, that her story didn't end with theft and heartbreak. It ended with hope. A year after the dinner, I was interviewed by a podcast about building businesses from nothing. The interviewer asked me about my biggest obstacle. Fear, I said. Not fear of failure, but fear of being seen. Fear of matching. Some people, usually the ones who hurt us, need us to be small because it makes them feel big. The real revolution is deciding that you're going to take up space anyway. The interview went viral. Women sent me messages. Some had narcissistic parents. Some had abusive partners. Some were stuck in the belief that they were too small to matter, too broken to rebuild, too damaged to deserve success. And I told them all the same thing my mother had told me. Don't let them define you. Build yourself. Choose yourself. Matter for yourself. The silver Mustang sits in my driveway, a symbol of freedom bought and paid for with my own hands, my own mind, my own determination. Sometimes I take it out just to feel the power of it, the sheer beautiful competence of an engine that knows exactly what it's built for. I built myself too, not to revenge him, but to save myself, not to prove him wrong, but to prove myself right. And the funny thing about freedom? Once you have it, you never go back. Once you taste what it feels like to matter on your own terms, to build your own life, to refuse to be small, there's no returning to the cage. Not ever. I spent 30 years believing my worth was determined by someone else's opinion of me, by my father's voice, by the table I was allowed to sit at, by the silence I was trained to keep. But here's what I learned. Respect is non-negotiable. Your worth isn't defined by anyone else's seating chart, not by who gets the credit, and certainly not by who your family believes first. My story proves that silence can be a weapon and patience can be power. I didn't scream. I didn't fight in the moment. I built. I documented. I became undeniable. And when the time came, I spoke, not from desperation, but from strength. If this resonated with you, if you've ever been gaslit into invisibility, I need you to hear this. Your silence doesn't make you weak. Your boundaries don't make you difficult. Your survival makes you extraordinary. The revolution happens when you decide to write your own ending. Subscribe and hit that notification bell for more stories about setting boundaries, finding your worth, and turning humiliation into triumph. Because your worth was never in question. It was only ever waiting to be remembered.